Hey, welcome back my sweet little Ewoks. This isn't going to be a normal Kriview, because this season made me so angry, I was low-key about to cry, out of pure hatred. So for this video I don't plan on covering the story in a lot of detail, instead I'm going to go through every single episode of season 8 and scale the disaster that we witnessed. And considering that when I made the video for season 1, I did something I didn't do for the rest of the seasons, which was making predictions for each character and highlighting them, this is kind of similar, but this time I'm going to focus on the positives and the negatives of each episode. Without further introductions, let's jump straight into it. Episode 1. Positives. Everyone gathers at Winterfell. I mean, you just gotta love a reunion. And this one is genuinely wholesome. All the characters we've been following for the entire show finally gather at Winterfell to fight the common enemy. Jon reunites with Arya and Bran. After not seeing each other since Jon left Winterfell to join the Night's Watch back in season 1, it was just really nice to see them reunite. It's one of those moments where you can't help but smile while watching. Theon saves Yara and decides to atone for his sins. After his decision last season to go and rescue Yara, Theon and a few Ironborn infiltrate the ship where she's being held. He manages to save her successfully, they share a sweet moment, and later have a talk. Theon tells her that he wants to return to Winterfell to fight the undead, and Yara basically tells him to do what he feels is right. They say their goodbyes and off he goes, trying to fix his past mistakes and finally do the right thing. Arya reunites with Gendry and the dog. With Jon returning to Winterfell, his whole squad comes back as well, which leads to Arya meeting Gendry and Sandor again. Her interaction with Sandor isn't exactly sweet or heartwarming, but that's kind of their thing, so it works. Her talk with Gendry on the other hand is nothing but sweet, and really awkward, with Gendry even complimenting Arya and calling her beautiful. Daenerys and Jorah revealed the fate of Sansa's father and brother. This part I genuinely liked, even though it was pretty heavy. Sam learns about the fate of his father and brother, which clearly devastates him. It's a bit strange, considering neither of them ever really cared about him. His father even sent him to the Night's Watch to basically freeze off and die, but we won't get into Sam's emotions. What really stood out was the dynamic of the scene itself. Sam is the one who saved Jorah, against all odds, and Daenerys knows that. The moment she realizes that she burned Sam's family alive, she's forced to face the consequences of her actions, on someone who had done nothing but good for her. And maybe, just maybe, that's the moment where it clicks that burning people alive doesn't actually solve every problem. The ending with Jaime and Bran locking eyes. A really nice touch was how Jaime's desertion from Cersei leads directly to him coming face to face with Bran again. That single look between them was so good. You don't need any dialogue, you can just feel the weight of guilt and regret in Jaime's eyes. The Wildlings and the Night's Watch discovered the Umber Child effigy. My highlight of episode 1 was the whole Wildlings and Crows discovery scene. The tension was built really well, and it all leads to the reveal of the Umber Child effigy, which basically sends a clear message: no one is safe. And then the jump scare happens. Honestly, it completely caught me off guard. I was so focused on Tormund talking that I didn't even notice the child's eyes turning blue until it was too late. Negatives. The Lady of Winterfell. Where does this confidence even come from? Has there ever been a single moment in the entire show where Sansa got herself out of trouble on her own, without someone else saving her or pushing the situation in her favor? Not with Joffrey, not with Ramsay, not even with Baelish. And yet, starting from last season and continuing into this one, she suddenly acts like some kind of a political mastermind. In reality, the only thing she consistently does is undermine Jon's authority in front of the northern houses, to the point where some of them openly start doubting him or straight up losing respect for him. This isn't strong female leadership, this is forced conflict created purely for drama. Cersei discovering new level of insanity. After Jaime leaves to actually do the right thing for once, Cersei immediately replaces him with a discount version of him. I guess she really does have a thing for pirates. She sleeps with Euron, then later lies to him and tells him that Jaime's child is his, which we'll get to later, and does all of this without a single shred of hesitation. On top of that, she orders Bronn to assassinate both Jaime and Tyrion, which is kind of wild considering she keeps claiming that everything she does is for her family and for House Lannister, basically trying to echo Tywin's legacy, just without any of the logic, intelligence or consistency behind it. What a great way to protect your family, by killing them first so no one else gets the chance. Brilliant! Sam tells Jon about his true name and heritage. This would normally go straight into the positives, but considering that the biggest and most important battle of the entire show is literally around the corner, dropping this truth bomb on Jon right now feels incredibly irresponsible. Sam is clearly still emotional because of what happened to his father and brother, and during the conversation he even brings up the idea that Jon could sit on the Iron Throne. And yeah, that helps absolutely no one. Not Jon, not the North, and definitely not the upcoming battle for humanity itself. What makes this even worse is that this review barely matters later on. Jon being a Targaryen ends up having almost no real impact on the story or its resolution, but we'll get to that when the time comes. That said, the reunion was nice, I'll give them that. Jon worrying about Gilly and baby Sam was genuinely sweet and felt very in character. Daenerys and Jon's love affair. And now for the worst moment of episode 1, and honestly part of last season as well, Daenerys and Jon's love story. Now I know some people might grab their torches over this, but I don't like their relationship at all. To me it feels completely forced for the sake of the plot, and yes, you could argue that every relationship in fiction exists for plot reasons, but this one appears right at the very end of the series and exists almost entirely to make the final more dramatic. The waterfall scene is another example of their whole relationship. Daenerys talking about staying there forever, hidden from the world. It's almost word for word the same fantasy Ygritte once saw Jon in the cave. Instead of feeling poetic, it feels recycled, like the writers ran out of ideas and reused an old emotional beat. At the end of the day, the relationship isn't built to stand on its own, it's there so the final hurts more, and for me that makes it feel less tragic and more artificial. Short opinion of episode 1. All things considered, episode 1 is a strong opening. It delivers on reunions, atmosphere, and a sense of looming danger. And it has enough genuinely good moments to get you invested again, which only makes what follows in the next episodes feel even more questionable. Episode 2. Positives. Jamie's sort of trial. So we get yet another trial in Winterfell, but this time it's for a pirate, not a snake. Progress, I guess. Jamie's trial doesn't exactly start strong, because let's be real, most people there really don't like him. Tyrion is basically the only one on his side, and even that feels like a family bias. And Jamie's CV? Yeah, not exactly something you'd proudly attach to a fighting application. Old breaking, backstabbing, kingslaying, just hit after hit. And on top of that, he killed Daenerys' father, so naturally she's not thrilled about seeing him breathe the same air as her. Tyrion tries his hardest to help his brother and convince Daenerys to trust him, but trusting the guy who stabbed your dad in the back isn't exactly an easy sell. And Daenerys isn't alone in that. Sansa is right there with her, because Aerys Targaryen isn't the only father Jaime has a history with. To make things worse, Jaime reveals Cersei's real plan, that she never intended to help and has been secretly gathering more troops, which yeah, doesn't make Tyrion look great, considering trusting Cersei was his idea. So now you've got Daenerys and Sansa both against Jaime, Bran casually dropping the things we do for love, like a professional hitman with one-liners, and Jaime's fate is looking absolutely sealed. But then Brienne steps in. She vouches for him, returning the favor for the bear incident, and reminds everyone that he's changed. Jon backs her up with pure logic. They need every capable fighter they can get, and just like that, Jaime earns his place. Not forgiveness, not trust, just a sword and a chance to fight the undead. Good guy Jaime. For once, Jaime is genuinely trying to be a better person. He has a calm, almost wholesome conversation with Tyrion, this time without threatening to split him in half. He treats Brienne with real respect, and with his apology to Bran, he shows a side of him that most people in Winterfell have never seen before. It doesn't erase what he's done, but it clearly shows how far he's come. We as viewers have known about this change for a long time since we followed his journey closely, but for most of the characters, this is the first time they're seeing that growth. Theon returns to Winterfell. Theon finally makes it back to Winterfell and asks Sansa to let him fight for them. Not as a Greyjoy, not as anything else, just as someone trying to do the right thing for once. Sansa accepts him, they share a genuine emotional hug, and just like that, another ally is secured for the coming battle. People afraid of battle. This was a really nice touch. When you're fighting for the survival of humanity, everyone matters, even the people who've never held a weapon in their lives. Seeing regular folk being forced into a fight they're terrified of made the upcoming battle feel heavier and more real. Jon reunites with Ed and Tormund. I mean, I just love a Night's Watch reunion, and having Tormund there was the cherry on top. It's short, simple, and it instantly brings back that old WoW energy. The drinking game. Some of our favorite characters finally get a moment to breathe, laughing, drinking, and playing Tyrion's old drinking game we first saw back in his scenes with Shae. And after a generous amount of wine, Jaime reveals that a king isn't strictly required to knight someone. A fellow knight can do it too. So he knights Brienne, finally fulfilling the one goal she's been chasing her entire life, becoming a respected knight. Easily one of the strongest and most satisfying moments of the episode. Arya, Sandor, and Beric. I really appreciate the comedic value of this scene. It feels like that moment at a family gathering when you decide to hang out with certain relatives and then immediately regret it and realize you need to leave. Awkward, uncomfortable, and somehow perfect. Sam gives Jorah his family sword. Sam says debt to Jorah Mormont was already paid the moment he saved Jorah's life, so giving away his family sword honestly feels like too much. That said, it's still a really cool moment. Sam knows Jorah is a better fit for the blade, and more importantly, that he'll take good care of it. Final moments before the battle. Podrick singing, people quietly living with the thought that this might be their last moments alive. Simple, calm, and effective. The army inside of Winterfell. Seeing the army of the dead finally within reach and realizing the battle is minutes away was genuinely cool. It low-key reminded me of Stannis' POV when he was marching towards Winterfell. The brothers of the Night's Watch. And my highlight of episode 2 goes to the Night's Watch. The brothers standing tall on the wall of Winterfell felt just like the old days on the wall. Jon talking with Sam and Ted before the battle was a really nice moment. And Ted joking with Sam brought back that old Castle Black energy. It shows that even though they've all walked long, brutal paths and grown a lot, deep down they can't help but return to those golden days, when life was simpler on the wall. Negatives. Daenerys being snappy at everyone except Jon. This is done purely to enhance the romantic aspect, and honestly, I just can't be bothered. When Tyrion makes a mistake, it's the end of the world, and when Jon makes a mistake that literally leads to Daenerys losing one of her dragons, it somehow gets forgotten really quickly. For some reason, Daenerys snaps at everyone except Jon, and yeah, that's because Jon is her lover, which I already said I'm not the biggest fan of. At the same time, she completely disregards the opinions of other people closest to her, people that have proven that even when they make mistakes, they genuinely try to do what's best for her. She does this with Sansa as well, and while Sansa isn't a perfect character by any means, I hate to admit it, but most of the time Daenerys snaps at her, it feels really unnecessary. The War Council. This is another thing I would have normally liked, because all of the fan favorite characters are finally in one place, but I really didn't, and the reason is Bran. Everywhere, in every place, in every form, whenever Bran is around, he's proclaimed as the highest being, the most important person in the room, time and time again. At this point it just feels like an agenda. There's really no other way to put it, because if Bran was actually as important as the show keeps telling us he is, the series would have ended way earlier. His narrow escape from the cave alone already proves how incapable the Night King was at dealing with this so-called important higher being. I mean, it's not like Bran is a cripple, and it's not like he was literally marked, allowing the Night King to know where he is every second of the day, and he still couldn't catch him. I mean, it's whatever, it's just season 8. Jon revealing his heritage to Daenerys right before the battle. This isn't a bad thing in principle. I'd even go as far as to say it was a good thing Jon taught her, but doing it right before the biggest battle of humanity's survival is an insane decision. Let me paint you a picture. If they lose the battle, they all die, so the reveal doesn't matter. If they win the battle, Jon can tell her afterwards, and no unnecessary chaos is introduced during the fight. I get that Jon is brutally honest and that's his character, but timing still matters, and this was the worst possible timing imaginable. The Arya and Gendry scene. The worst moment of episode 2 is definitely that Arya and Gendry sex scene. This is one of those scenes that had to happen simply because it had to happen, regardless of what was going on. It felt like an anime ship being forced, and I didn't like it one bit, especially knowing it happened purely because it needed to. Throughout the show, Arya repeatedly says that she doesn't see herself as a lady and doesn't want that kind of life. She even shows this earlier with Gendry. Gendry, look how good at darts I am. Asserting herself as a warrior, not a romantic interest. So for her to suddenly initiate intimacy instead of focusing on the upcoming battle feels completely out of character and totally unnecessary. Short opinion of episode 2. While episode 2 is still a relatively strong episode on its own, it already starts dropping heavy hints about what's coming next. The weak plot points begin to surface, some of the questionable decisions from the previous season start taking a clearer shape, and the cracks become more visible. Even though it has genuinely good moments, like the drinking game, the episode still feels like it's not fully up to the task of setting up what's supposed to be the most important battle in the entire series. Episode 3. Positives. I genuinely don't think there is anything positive about this whole battle. If I really have to reach for something, then sure, humanity won. And I guess that's my highlight of the episode. Negatives. The whole battle. And the worst moment of episode 3 is the battle itself. Okay, why was Jon basically out of the battle? As a leader in every battle he's won so far, he's been fighting on the front lines. Here though, he's suddenly on a dragon, without really having the time to learn how to ride one, which is already strange on its own. You could argue that because he's a Targaryen, dragon riding is in his blood, so he can just do it. But considering the fact that Jon's true heritage doesn't even end up mattering later on, I'd argue that his dragon riding wasn't meant to logically come from that, but rather to create a Jon and Daenerys power couple versus the Night King moment. At this point, Jon's spot armor isn't even the biggest issue, because how does Melisandre just appear out of nowhere? The undead are literally everywhere, and yet she casually shows up and lights all the Dothraki weapons on fire? That's so insane that I was honestly left speechless. Nah, and let me ask you this. Why did Ted Tollett have to die? I'm going to give you a second. Turururu, turururu. Ding 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 ding. So Jon can take his place at Castle Black later. That's it. That's the reason. No heroic payoff, no meaningful arc conclusion, just a convenient death to clear a spot. Now let's talk about Theon charging the Night King. This wasn't worth the sacrifice that atoned for his past sins. It was reckless and dumb. People forget that Theon is actually a decent fighter. Him charging the Night King head on like that wasn't brave, it was pointless. And honestly, the entire battle is a mess. From Jon and Daenerys chasing the Night King in the air like it's some weird dogfight minigame, to Daenerys suddenly forgetting she's in the middle of a battle. Look, Jon, run! And almost getting herself killed. To the final nail in the coffin, Arya killing the Night King. Let's break this down. Bran literally tells everyone that the Night King always knows where he is because of the mark. So why does the Night King decide to attack Winterfell head on? We already saw the undead piling bodies to climb walls. So what exactly was stopping them from attacking from the sides, overwhelming the defenses and sending everything straight at Bran? If the Night King had committed fully to Bran from the start, he would have won easily. And let's be real, if anyone had to kill the Night King, it had to be Jon. No one else. Jon is the one who discovered the threat. Jon is the one who warned everyone. Jon faced the Night King multiple times. When you think of the Night King, you think of Jon Snow standing against him. And here's the real elephant in the room. Game of Thrones started with the White Walkers. From episode 1, they were framed as the ultimate threat to humanity. We got seasons of build-up, glimpses, teases, small confrontations, and then when it's finally time, the Night King says nothing, does nothing meaningful, and gets one shot by Arya after the battle was already basically won. Arya just jumps straight at him like she's prime 2008 Jeff Hardy from the top rope. And don't even get me started on this part. The Night King catches Arya and doesn't instantly kill her. This is the same guy who threw a spear from hundreds of meters away and pierced a dragon. But he can't snap Arya's neck on the spot. The White Walkers and the Night King were never explored properly because the story became too obsessed with King's Landing and the Iron Throne. And because of that, when the time finally came, the Army of the Dead didn't feel terrifying. It felt rushed, mishandled, and ultimately wasted. Short opinion of episode 3. An absolute disaster of an episode. The battle wasn't even close to being good, and I'll go as far as to say that the Battle of the Bastards was miles better in every possible way. Tension, emotional weight, payoff, everything. Ramsay was a far more compelling villain than the Night King ever was. And that says a lot considering the 7 seasons of build-up leading to this moment. The hype was massive, the setup was there, and the execution completely missed the mark. Overall, it was painfully disappointing. But hey, at least we got to meet Agent 007. 0 words spoken, 0 cripples code, 7 seasons of build-up. Magnificent. Episode 4. Positives. The funeral. I didn't really understand why the bodies needed to be burned considering the Night King was already defeated, but I guess there were simply too many bodies to bury. Nonetheless, seeing our favorite characters say farewell to their loved ones, who also happen to be characters we love, was a solid emotional moment. No battle is won without casualties, and this one was no different. The feast after the battle. I'm mainly putting this into the positives because of Sandor and Tormund. Trust me, I was really close to placing it in the negatives. But this season already has so many of those that I'm giving this 50-50 a pass into the positives. Everyone is celebrating, some more than others, and for me, Sandor Sandor and Tormund really stand out. First Sandor, he gives Gendry a much needed reality check, then mostly minds his own business while munching, but every comment he drops is top tier. There's just something about Sandor's blunt, no filter directness that makes everything he says funny. And then there's Tormund. He unfortunately gets rejected by Brienne, which, let's be honest, no one saw coming, and then goes on to celebrate with his fellow wildlings, openly praising Jon right in front of Daenerys, which yeah, she clearly doesn't like. The moment Tormund says the word king, Daenerys instantly goes into a trance, like she just heard the worst thing imaginable. Overall, the feast works pretty well in terms of comedic value, but when it comes to the actual story, I'm not really sure. A positive note for Arya. A bit of redemption finally happens after the feast, because Gendry, now the Word of Storm's End, finds Arya, tells her he loves her, and basically proposes to her, wanting her to be his queen, and she refuses, saying she is no lady, and never has been. That's just not who she is. Before that, Gendry asks her why she isn't celebrating with everyone else, and she simply replies with,
I am celebrating.
while knocking her bow. And yeah, that just feels right. And that's exactly how it was supposed to be. Arya is the complete opposite of Sansa. The one who doesn't chase comfort or pleasure. The one who doesn't want to marry a king or become a lady. I don't know what happened with the earlier scenes, but at least we managed to salvage something meaningful here. Jaime and Brienne's scene. A lot of sex scenes this season, huh? This is pretty much the end result of Jaime's transformation, fully committing to fighting for the good instead of the bad. It might not be the perfect finish line for his arc, but I can respect it enough to give it a positive note. Unfortunately, as a certified Tormund enthusiast, this one kinda hurts my soul, but it is what it is. Bron's had enough of the Lannisters. Honestly, this scene makes perfect sense for Bron. Even if it feels awful to watch, taking Cersei's order to go after Tyrion and Jaime, the only two people you could even loosely call his friends, is crazy. But Bron has always been crazy in exactly this way. He's not a hero, he's not loyal, and he never pretended to be. He's a mercenary, a cutthroat, and someone who has always chosen survival and profit over feelings. So as much as it hurts because we care about Tyrion and some people even care about Jaime, this is just consistency. And using the same crossbow Tyrion used to kill Tywin, that detail alone makes the scene even better. It's cold, ironic, and very Game of Thrones-like. Sandor and Arya on their way to King's Landing. No matter how cold or blunt their conversations are, they are always somehow wholesome. Even if Sandor seems frustrated that Arya is tagging along for the ride, deep down if he's not happy, then he's at least content. And honestly, scenes like this just bring back memories of a time when the show wasn't completely butchered. Jon bids farewell to Tormund and Sam. At first I actually put this one in the negatives, mainly because of the ending and how it pretty much negated all the feelings here and the weight of the farewell, but after thinking about it more, if the ending wasn't such a disaster, this scene would have been a really nice one. Jon saying goodbye to Tormund, basically his right-hand man, Sam and Gilly revealing they're going to have a child, and that if it's a boy, they'll name him Jon. That was genuinely touching. I think the reason it felt weaker at first is because of how everything ends. Jon saying farewell to Tormund here, and then they just meet again in the final episode anyway, but taken on its own, this scene works. It's the ending that drags it down, not the moment itself. Tyrion and Varys talk. Two best friends talking, one of them blinded by love, incapable of seeing past the delusion he's created for himself, the other trying his best to make him face the truth, a truth that hurts, and is very different from what Tyrion wants to believe, which makes the whole situation not only sad but honestly hopeless. I actually feel bad for Varys here. He sees things for what they really are, but no one believes him simply because they're blinded by love. Varys cementing his cowards. My highlight of episode 4 is Varys. With Varys, I always had this thought in the back of my mind, even when he openly stated that everything he does is for the good of the realm. I was still somewhat skeptical, always expecting some kind of betrayal down the line, but during his conversation with Daenerys, the way he explains why innocent people must not die because of a children's quarrel, with genuine emotions in his eyes, finally revealed to me how he truly feels about the situation. And telling this to Daenerys at that moment, when she was still shaken by Euron's ambush, openly stating an opinion that directly contradicts that of a tyrant, and placing the lives of many above his own, made this a really powerful scene. Sometimes the bravest people are the ones you least expect. Negatives. Daenerys going insane. Throughout the entire show, we are told that she's trying not to become her father, only for her to completely become her father by the end. So what was the point of all the "a child shouldn't bear the sins of their parents" message in Game of Thrones, if the child ends up becoming the parent anyway? That will be like the Umber and Karstark heirs turning out exactly like their fathers after Jon pardons them. It would completely invalidate the message. All of that counseling, all of that planning, all of those supposedly good deeds, only for her to just go insane. And sure, we'll talk about the full insanity later, but this part is here for two reasons. First, because it's part of the episode, and second, because of her relationship with Jon. I already explained why I didn't like their romance earlier, but fine, it's in the show, someone might like it, whatever. But why force it so hard if it's going to be overridden by an existential plot point later on? The show spends so much time focusing on love, only for love to suddenly not matter at all because there are bigger things, except those bigger things weren't important when love was the main focus. It doesn't make sense. Instead of feeling proud that her lover is being acknowledged by the people, she becomes jealous that she isn't the center of attention. But then why are we even focusing on love if at the end of the day all she really wants is the throne? Her love for Jon is what brings her north, a completely logical move if her only goal was the throne. But then she later disregards that same love for the throne she was supposedly willing to abandon for it. It's so divided about what it wants to focus on that I'm the one going insane. The War Council before the decision to attack Cersei. Daenerys, fully aware that their forces are exhausted, injured, and barely standing after the battle, just decides to attack immediately without a second thought. When Sansa disagrees and points out that this is unreasonable, that the army clearly needs time to recover, Daenerys simply insists on marching south anyway. What shocked me the most though is Jon's reaction. He doesn't defy her, he doesn't even seriously question it. He just says they'll keep their word, and that's it. And let's be honest, he agrees because he loves Daenerys. This is completely uncharacteristic of Jon. Jon fully understands that sending an unfit army into another war will only lead to more deaths, more injuries, and more unnecessary suffering. Waiting is clearly the better option. Yet he sides against reason. Now you could argue that this is in character because Jon values honesty and keeping his word above all else, but that argument falls apart when you look at his past. Jon has already gone against truth when blindly following it would lead to disaster. The clearest example is when he was captured by the wildlings. He didn't abandon the idea of being a crow, but he also didn't reveal it to Mance immediately. He waited, understood the consequences, and only revealed the truth when the moment was right. So I don't see any reason why he wouldn't at least argue with Daenerys here, especially given the potential consequences. And don't get me wrong, I really dislike Sansa and her opinions most of the time, but here she was right. Jon disagreeing with her not because of logic, strategy or morality, but because of love, just further forces this romance and breaks Jon's character piece by piece to make it work. Jon revealing his heritage to the Starks. At this point I genuinely started wondering if even Jon knows which side he's on anymore. Jon has always been a family man, even as a bastard, protecting his family, whether that meant the Starks or the Brothers of the Night's Watch, was always at the core of who he was. He stood by them, even when he had already given up on himself, like during the battle against Ramsay, but since season 7, his affair with Daenerys has split him right down the middle. And sure, if the show wants to go in on that romance, fine, I don't like it, some people might, whatever. That's not even the main issue. The issue is this: after he decides to side with Daenerys at the War Council, he then turns around and reveals his true heritage to his family, a family that, if you somehow haven't noticed by now, does not trust Daenerys at all. And let's be real, Sansa hearing that information was a disaster waiting to happen. The moment Jon says it, you can already tell she's thinking about Tyrion or Varys. That reveal doesn't unite anyone, it just throws gasoline on an already burning fire. If Jon wanted to side with Daenerys, that would at least be consistent. If he wanted to side with the Starks, that would also make sense, but doing both at the same time just makes him indecisive and reckless. And as the saying goes, when someone chases two rabbits, he catches neither. Sansa and Tyrion se talk on the Winterfell wall. So Sansa snitches on Jon literally right after he tells her the truth. Tyrion in return snitches on Daenerys by admitting that he's afraid of her. At this point everyone is just snitching on everyone. And yeah, let's be fair, it is Jon's fault for telling someone like Sansa in the first place. That was never going to end well. But Sansa betraying him almost immediately, hiding it behind the excuse that many in our family don't do well in the capital, and that she's doing this to protect Jon just wasn't it. If you actually want to protect someone, you don't expose the one piece of information that puts their life in danger. What she does doesn't save Jon, it puts him directly in the crosshairs. So no matter how you spin it, this wasn't some clever political move or a noble act of concern, it was betrayal, plain and simple. Euron's ambush. So let me get this straight. Bronn once sniped Wildfire from a much greater distance and still didn't land a fatal hit on a dragon with a scorpion, but Euron's crew suddenly turns into a burst fire death squad and lands multiple consecutive hits like it's nothing. And yeah, I know, but the dragon was injured, he couldn't fly properly. Except, it really doesn't look like he was struggling to fly at all, and after the first direct hit, injured or not, speeding away wasn't really an option anymore. The only way the dragon survives is if Euron's men miss some of their shots, which they just conveniently don't. But a Greyjoy never misses an arrow. Sure, but Bronn has better range feats than all of the Greyjoys combined so far, and even if the scorpion is different from a bow, we've already seen the Night King miss Daenerys with a spear back in season 7. My point isn't that the dragon shouldn't have been hit at all, one hit would have been fine, but multiple perfect shots in a row that instantly kill it? That's insane. And then after taking out the dragon, Euron's fleet wipes out Daenerys' ships and somehow manages to capture Missandei out of everyone in the water. In all that chaos, they specifically managed to spot her and just yoink her. Yeah, crazy work. Cersei tells Euron Jaime's shout is his, plus Missandei's capture. When the war is won, the lion shall rule the land, the kraken shall rule the sea. So I guess Cersei is doing all of this for the survival of the Lannister name and for her and Jaime's shout, right? Except not really. Earlier, she tells Jaime she wants people to see them together, she talks about the future, about finally being open, and then, without hesitation, she turns around and tells Euron that the child is his, which is awful in the most Cersei way possible, because she's basically recreating her entire situation with Robert, lying about the father, using a man for power and protection, while keeping Jaime in the shadows. And no matter how you look at it, that is a betrayal of Jaime. It's just Cersei. As for Missandei's capture, we'll get into that in more detail later. Sansa allows Brienne to tell Jaime about Euron's ambush. So Jaime is just a friend now? Since when? Why is he being informed about what's happening in the war at all? One single battle doesn't erase everything he's done. Yeah, he is trying to be better, and yes, he has changed in many ways, but that doesn't automatically make him a fully trusted ally, especially not someone you casually brief on major war developments. And Sansa of all people allowing this feels weird. She's skeptical of everyone, constantly questioning motives and loyalty, but suddenly Jaime gets a pass? It feels really inconsistent with how cautious she's been with literally everyone else. I don't know, this one just doesn't sit right with me. Missandei's execution. I didn't really mind Grey Worm and Missandei's relationship, that doesn't mean I loved it, but it also didn't annoy me the way that Jon and Daenerys did. Using it purely as a shock value though, yeah, that's where it loses me. It's painfully obvious what this scene is meant to do. Reignite Daenerys' conflict with Cersei. For most of this season, and a big part of the last one, the focus was on the undead, not Cersei. Once the Night King is dealt with, they needed to flip the switch back to the final boss, and shock value was the fastest way to do it. But this just wasn't the right way. If the final was always meant to be about Cersei instead of the Night King, which I already don't agree with, but fine, whatever, then at least earn it. Don't force it through a poorly set up execution. The problem isn't Missandei dying, it's how we got there. The ambush, the capture, the convenience of it all just feels gross and unearned. It doesn't feel tragic, it feels manufactured. Jaime abandons Brienne and returns to Cersei. And the worst moment of episode 4 goes to Jaime's decision. We're talking about 7 seasons of character development being thrown out the window in one scene. From the arrogant, scummy noble in Winterfell, to his capture and eventual crippling, losing the very hand that defined him. From saving Brienne from the bear, to finally leaving Cersei behind, symbolically abandoning the worst part of himself. All of that growth brought him back to Winterfell as a changed man, only for it to be shattered by a single decision. Earlier, I even placed Jaime's arc on the positive side, because the show was still following the idea that he had changed, that losing his hand forced him to grow, to keep his word, to fight for something better, and then they just undo it. He doesn't struggle, he doesn't hesitate, he just goes back to being the same man he was before, as if none of it mattered. No payoff, no internal conflict, just regression. It's really a shame. Short opinion of episode 4. Yeah, this is where the season really breaks its own spine. Even if the first 3 episodes weren't up to standard, you could still see what they were trying to do, there were ideas you could defend, character beats you could argue for. Episode 4, this is the moment where the drop stops being a swap and turns into a cliff. If I had to pinpoint why the final ended up the way it did, it absolutely starts here. This episode builds the ramp for disaster. The earlier episodes weren't great, but they weren't this aggressively careless. And Jaime, why just why? He was one of the most compelling characters in the entire show, precisely because his arc was about change, consequence, and self-awareness. Losing his hand wasn't just physical punishment, it was narrative discipline, and now he's reduced to a puppet, dragged wherever the plot needs him, saying things he doesn't believe just to justify a reversal the story didn't turn, and that problem spreads everywhere. Season 8 has this horrific pattern where every character you once liked becomes either unreasonable, unlikable, or outright unrecognizable, not because they evolved, but because the writing forces them into shortcuts. Jon becomes a passive bystander to his own morals, surrendering his judgment to a romance that actively contradicts who he's been for 7 seasons. Tyrion, once the sharpest mind in the room, suddenly can't treat people he's known his whole life. Jaime's growth is crushed for shock value. None of this feels like tragedy, it feels like neglect. And that's the worst part, it's not that these characters fall, it's that their past no longer matters. How are we supposed to keep liking Jon when his defining trait, moral independence, disappears? How are we supposed to care about Jaime when the very thing that made him special is erased? How do you take Tyrion seriously when he's a shadow of his former self? They aren't tragic figures anymore, they're shells wearing familiar faces. So yeah, feeling betrayed makes total sense. Not betrayed by the characters, but by the story that promised their journeys meant something. And honestly, you'll be right to single out Varys. Man stood on business. No romance fuck, no denial, no self-delusion. Quietly consistent to the very end. In a season full of people losing their spines, the so-called bowless eunuch had the biggest ones in the room. Episode 5. Positives. The people of King's Landing. It's easy to forget that King's Landing isn't just the throne room and the Red Keep. It's a city full of people. Families, children, regular lives. Just like every other town we've seen in the show. That's what makes this hit harder. When Cersei pulls everyone into the city center, these people don't see it as a tactical shield. They genuinely believe it's for their protection. To them, the crown is still supposed to protect them, not use them. I think something the later seasons really lost was this perspective. The common people were never the main focus, but earlier on we at least got glimpses, Flea Bottom, Marjorie visiting orphans, small moments that reminded us these wars always had victims beyond the nobles. It would have been even more effective if we had seen more of their lives leading up to this, but even as it is, this moment works. It reminds us that what's about to happen isn't just the fall of a ruler, it's the destruction of an entire city full of people who never chose any of this. Arya and the dog reach their destination. Sandor straight up turns into Arya's dad in this scene. She casually tells the guard she's here to kill Cersei, and instead of shutting him down, Sandor just rolls with it. Even backs her up and strengthens the case. I don't know why, but that dynamic is just hilarious. The way he fully accepts it like, yeah, that checks out. Makes the whole scene way funnier than it has any right to be. Varys' final push plus his attempt at Jon. And the highlight of episode 5 goes to Varys again.
Man, the first time was so nice, I had to do it twice.
Honestly, Varys might be the MVP of the season. The last genuinely reasonable character left, the only one who stayed true to his principles till the very end, untouched by the forced love affair shoved in our faces every 5 minutes. This is his final move, going to Jon, and when the door shuts right in front of him too, he knows it's over. So he does the only thing left, he tries to make it count. Negatives. I'm gonna tell Daenerys. Is this even Tyrion? Like, is this the same person who killed his own father? And speaking of that scene, do we remember who helped him escape certain death afterwards? Varys. Jaime too, but he's not the focus focus right now? Varys saved him, stopped him from rotting away or drowning in wine. And this is how Tyrion repays that? By betraying him straight to a literal tyrant. What makes it worse is that even Tyrion himself wasn't even sure about Daenerys. He openly told Sansa he fears her. So now we're in this weird love-fear limbo where that's enough for him to sell out the one person who actually stood by him when no one else did. That doesn't really feel like Tyrion. Varys' execution. So Jon betrays Daenerys by telling the Starks. Sansa tells Tyrion, Tyrion tells Varys, and Daenerys executes Varys. Jon, Sansa and Tyrion all walk away completely fine. Apparently you can leak the biggest secret in the realm as long as you're close enough to Jon. Yes, Daenerys never fully trusted Varys and warned him that his next misstep would be his last. But Varys didn't discover anything through his spy network. He learned it from Tyrion, who learned it from Sansa, who learned it from Jon. So why is Varys the only one paying for it? Why isn't Tyrion punished or Sansa or Jon? It clearly serves the narrative, but it just doesn't feel right. If she actually wanted to make an example of treason, executing Tyrion and Varys together right in front of Jon would have made way more sense. I don't have love here, I only have fear. What are we even saying at this point? I don't know, maybe don't burn people alive next time? Just a thought. And the biggest simp of them all replies with,
I love you.
this is supposed to be a serious heavy moment, but it just completely collapses under how absurd it is. Jon isn't conflicted, he isn't questioning anything, he just stands there and reaffirms his love like nothing happened. The second he said that, I was genuinely fuming. Not because it was tragic, but because it made no sense for his character, for the situation, or for the weight the scene wanted to have. Tyrion suddenly decides killing innocents ain't the deal. After snitching on Varys for doing the right thing, Tyrion suddenly realizes that maybe Varys was right. Crazy how that works. So he goes to Daenerys and basically begs her, please don't massacre King's Landing if the bells ring. Daenerys, of course, looks like she's absolutely not buying it. No reassurance, no hesitation, just that cold stare. Then Daenerys casually mentions that Jaime's being captured after he headed south to see Cersei. Don't worry, we'll come back to this later. At this point, Tyrion isn't making decisions. He's reacting to the consequences of his own bad ones. Tyrion asks Davos for a favor. Why does Davos even go along with this? It's not like they're sneaking into King's Landing to free Gendry or negotiate some kind of a deal. Davos knows exactly what Tyrion is planning, that he's going to free Jaime, and he still helps him. This is really strange coming from Davos. Tyrion frees Jaime. At this point, the amount of recycled scenes is genuinely exhausting. It feels like half of the season is just earlier moments copy-pasted with worse context. Jaime getting captured and freed again, Arya and Sandor's journey again, Daenerys and Jon having their dramatic waterfall scene that's clearly mimicking Jon and Ygritte, Cersei lying to Euron about the child just like she did with Robert. If recycling worked like this, the planet would have been saved already. And then there's Tyrion, another spineless moment added to the pile. I'm honestly at a stage where I'm questioning whether this is even remotely close to book Tyrion anymore, because this version feels like a shadow of the character we used to know. If anyone's read the books, please tell me, I'm genuinely curious. 20,000 Golden Company soldiers. Am I tripping, or does this not look like 20,000 soldiers? Because I actually stopped and checked. The combined forces of Jon and Ramsay at the Battle of the Bastards were roughly half of that, and those armies felt massive, visually overwhelming, chaotic, dense. Now you're telling me the Golden Company has double that number, and what we see on screen is this? I'm not nitpicking numbers for the sake of it, I'm going after consistency. If the show could convincingly portray a 10,000-ish army seasons ago, then portraying 20,000 later should have been even easier, especially with a bigger budget and better tech. Instead it feels scaled down, empty and weirdly weightless, and that kills immersion, not because the number itself matters, but because the show taught us what large armies are supposed to look like, and then ignored its own precedent. If one battle could sell it, another one could too. This just feels lazy. Jaime versus Euron. This fight had to happen. The Kraken versus the Lion. A battle for custody over Cersei's child. Honestly, it's the Game of Thrones version of Rey Mysterio versus Eddie Guerrero for custody of Dominic Mysterio. Jaime is basically a walking corpse here. He takes an insane amount of damage, bleeds out half his body weight, and somehow keeps fighting. None of it really matters though, because the fight isn't about tension. We already know Jaime has to get to Cersei. This isn't a duel, it's a checkpoint. I still don't know how Euron even survived up to this point, but sure he did. And somehow he also ends up on the exact same hidden path Jaime is using to reach Cersei. How? No idea. Euron might just be a psychic at this point. If Jaime hadn't finished him off, we probably would have gotten the three-eyed Kraken to rival the three-eyed Brandon. In the end, Jaime gets the dub and continues on his way to his beloved sister. Because of course he does. The final battle. This one was pretty obvious, wasn't it? The worst moment of the episode being the battle itself. It's honestly impressive how every major battle in Game of Thrones before this ranged from good to near perfect, and then we get this one and the Night King battle, both of which feel more like chores than actual experiences. We already talked about Jaime versus Euron, but I have to bring Euron again. So let me get this straight. During his ambush, they instantly snipe a dragon out of the sky, no problem, but now suddenly they can't hit one even once? Interesting, very interesting. As for Jon, since he's technically present, he's basically been reduced to a background NPC. Arya gets more screen time than him. He's just there, waiting for episode 6 to finish the job and ruin his character properly. Now let's address the elephant nuking the room. Daenerys burning all of King's Landing. If I'm feeling a little slimy, I could say this is just another recycled scene, because a city being obliterated to send a message feels oddly familiar to the Sept of Bayor, but fine, we will let that one slide. At first I genuinely wondered why the plot suddenly turned her insane, rushed her character, and forced a love story that clearly wasn't meant to exist. Then it hit me. This was the fastest way to end everything. 3 episodes for the Night King, 3 episodes for King's Landing, boom, done. How do you finish the story quickly? You kill or neutralize everyone who can move the plot forward. Then toss Jon back to the Night's Watch like it's season 1 again. Simple. No one left to do anything interesting. The story just ends. Daenerys burning King's Landing was the easiest and fastest way to do that.
I don't have love here. I only have fear.
It's a rush decision meant to wrap things up, nothing more. There is really no point over analyzing it. The only part of the battle I genuinely enjoyed was the dog versus his substance abusing zombie brother. The fight was brutal, direct and weirdly funny at times, and Sandor pushing the mountain into the fire, the thing he feared most, was actually poetic. Revenge becoming bigger than the man himself is something Sandor talked about for seasons, and he finally cements it. Now speaking of the dog, let's talk about Arya. Why was she even in King's Landing? Let's be honest. She's there purely as a camera lens for civilian suffering. She exists to run through the streets so we can feel how bad it is, and I get the intention, but this doesn't work for me. We all knew Arya wasn't going to die. Between the narrative setup and her killing the Night King, there was zero tension, so instead of making the tragedy stronger, her presence actually weakens it. The destruction is powerful enough on its own. Using Arya to scream, "Look, innocent people are dying," just feels forced. Finally, Jaime and Cersei dying together. I'm split on this. On one hand, they started everything together, so ending together makes symbolic sense. On the other hand, Jaime shouldn't have been there at all. Having a villain stay a villain is fine, giving a villain a redemption arc is fine, but giving them a redemption arc, then undoing it, then having them comfort the worst villain in the show in a way that humanizes both, that's just disappointing. Short opinion of episode 5. If you wanted Daenerys to go insane, fine. If you wanted her to love Jon and have them end up at the throne, or just her, also fine, but you need build up for that. Instead we get a dragon dying out of nowhere, someone calling Jon king once, and suddenly she's fully deranged. That kind of turn doesn't work without proper setup, it just feels rushed. What makes it even worse is the way love is handled. The show tells us Daenerys is completely in love with Jon, yet she goes insane over power and the throne. Those two things don't really coexist in the way they're portrayed here. If Jon truly mattered more than anything, then the throne wouldn't suddenly outweigh him. At this point the show is just juggling themes, love, madness, destiny, power, without committing to any of them. It's a strange decision to say the least. Episode 6. Positives. Arya's ascending. I guess my highlight of episode 6 is Arya's ascending. If there is one ending I can genuinely get behind in the entire show, it's hers. Her choosing to leave Westeros and sail into the unknown actually fits her character perfectly. She was never meant to rule, never meant to settle, never meant to play the game. From the very start, Arya was about movement, freedom, curiosity, and rejecting the road the world tried to force onto her. An ending built around exploration and adventure is exactly where she should land. And that's what makes it frustrating. Because if the writers clearly understood where Arya was supposed to end up, then why was her character handled so poorly along the way? Why turn her into an invisible plot device, strip her struggles of weight, and trash her growth, only to suddenly remember who she's supposed to be at the very end? They got the destination right, they just completely butchered the journey. Negatives. First moments after the battle. Oh look guys, love suddenly isn't that cute anymore. When your crush burns an entire city to the ground, right? Maybe tell her you love her again, Jon. Especially when she states that in Westeros, she has fear, not love. We're watching the two most rational characters in the entire series finally realize what's happening, after they've already been completely played. And they don't look tragic or conflicted. They look like absolute fools. And that should never have been the case. Before this season, hell even before the last one, did anyone see Jon or Tyrion as idiots? No. They were respected, intelligent characters, each with a strong sense of justice and clear principles. Now they are reduced to a laughingstock, waking up way too late to consequences they should have seen coming miles away. Their characters are completely ruined, and somehow against all odds, it still gets worse. Jon closes his eyes to injustice. Remember when I said that Game of Thrones likes to slowly undermine its characters, making them less and less likable before something bad happens to them? This scene is another clear example of that. Jon does try to stop Grey Worm, briefly. He says something, realizes Grey Worm isn't listening, and then just gives up. No persistence, no authority, no real pushback, and that's the problem. Jon Snow has never been a character who backs down that easily when innocent lives are on the line. His strongest moments always came from standing his ground, even when it put him at risk, even when the odds were against him. Here he could have pressed harder, he could have ordered Grey Worm to stand down, he could have said he'd take it up with Daenerys, he could have delayed it, escalated it, anything. Instead, after a half-hearted attempt, he walks away and lets it happen, and that's what feels wrong. Ask yourself honestly, when you watch that scene, did it feel like something Jon Snow would normally do? Would that Jon Snow let it slide? Because to me, that wasn't Jon. That was the show bending his character to fit where it wanted him to end up. Tyrion says despair. He really did love them, that much is clear, but still, he should have been prepared for this moment. From the second he decided to side fight with Daenerys, this outcome was always on the table. Even if he truly believed she was a merciful ruler, there was always the possibility that Cersei would be executed. And with everything that happened before this point, Tyrion, who is constantly portrayed as the smartest man in the room, completely excluding the possibility of becoming the last Lannister standing, is just another form of the same delusion we've been seeing from him for a while now. This might sound cold, but I'm not saying he shouldn't grieve. Of course he should. What I'm saying is, when he's clearing the rubble, what exactly did he expect to find? After seeing the exit completely collapsed, did he genuinely believe Jaime and Cersei were alive? His reaction does humanize them in a way. Tyrion breaking down shifts the emotion from his woes to their deaths, because if they were alive, he wouldn't be crying like that. So the scene is clearly trying to make us feel for them through him. But here's the issue. If Jaime hadn't completely nuked his character development, maybe this would have worked. Tyrion and Jaime had a real bond, so humanizing Jaime through Tyrion makes sense. But Cersei? No. Absolutely not, no way. Personally, during this scene, I felt more disappointment than sadness. Disappointment that this is how it was handled. And how can I even take this scene seriously when Tyrion starts hitting Kriview with a brick like a caveman? Bendany becomes a necromancer. So let me understand this properly. We didn't have the CGI or whatever excuse to make the Golden Company look bigger, scarier and actually feel like 20,000 men. But after Daenerys wins, she's standing in front of an army that somehow looks even bigger than the first time we ever saw it. So my only logical conclusion is, Daenerys just might be a necromancer. Because if I remember correctly, after the undead absolutely demolished the Dothraki, no more than 10 of them survived the battle. Maybe. Generously. And now suddenly we're looking at, what? At least 11 of them? But somehow this isn't even the worst part of the scene. A few moments later, Tyrion finally confronts Daenerys about the destruction of King's Landing. He throws away his handpin, resigns, and openly defies her. This should be massive. And Daenerys? She doesn't rage, she doesn't argue, she doesn't even really react. She just has him arrested. Like he mildly inconvenienced her. No weight, no gravity, she doesn't take it seriously at all. Jon is right there too, and she basically just ignores him. At this point in the show, Daenerys hasn't just gone mad, she's ascended, with her newly acquired necromancer powers and her complete immunity to consequences. Oh, and Arya is still in King's Landing, just kind of sniffing around, watching things happen, for reasons I genuinely don't understand. Screen time, I guess. What are we even doing at this point? Jon visits Tyrion in prison, so Jon goes to visit Tyrion in prison, and during their conversation, Jon drops this absolute gem.
She's not her father, no more than your Tywin Lannister.
I mean, come on. This is a full-on clown fiesta at this point. I genuinely don't even know what to say anymore without repeating myself or stating the painfully obvious, but this scene is actually a brilliant example of viewer brainwashing, and I mean that unironically. Look at how it's framed. Tyrion is suddenly the rational one, calm, reflective, reasonable. Jon is the delusional one, emotional, naive, blindly loyal. And wouldn't you know it, Tyrion gets a good ending, while Jon gets possibly the worst ending in the entire show. These are exactly the predispositions I was talking about earlier. The show actively destroys Jon's character just to make his disgusting ending feel earned or logical. They mock him narratively, so when the hammer finally drops, the audience goes, yeah, I guess this makes sense. And honestly, that's top tier manipulation, because if you rewatch this season 5 times, yeah, it might start to feel coherent. You start thinking the ending naturally grew out of these scenes, but the problem is, these scenes should not exist in the first place. This isn't development, it's character assassination for the sake of a rushed plot. Season 7 and 8 Jon, and seasons 1 through 6 Jon are essentially two completely different characters. I mean, it's just season 8, whatever. Jon murders Daenerys. The simple fact that I had to rewatch these scenes multiple times to make this video just makes me angrier every single time. So Daenerys finally reaches her goal, the throne she's been chasing her entire life, and then Jon walks in. They start talking and Jon, who has apparently just remembered who he is, suddenly starts yelling at her for burning the city and murdering children. Welcome to Earth. How was the afterlife? Jetwag treating you okay? And then they kiss. They kiss. I mean, it's just season 8. You honestly have to admire how borderline insane this whole thing is. Right after the kiss, Jon kills Daenerys, and then the BBD pulls up, looking extra pissed. The Dragoon melts the Iron Throne, because symbolism I guess, grabs Daenerys' body and flies away. If Daenerys can't have the throne, no one will. Straight Todor behavior, by the way. And yes, BBD stands for Big Black Dragoon. This scene right here is a perfect example of why I hate love affairs in shows, and this one in particular might be one of the worst ones I've ever seen. It genuinely feels like before Jon and Daenerys fell in love, the show still had a soul. Even if people dislike season 6, I personally like it. It still had that Game of Thrones DNA, dark fantasy, unpredictability, moral tension, the insanity of battles like the Battle of the Bastards. Now, none of that is left. The show feels closer to Love Island than dark fantasy. The unpredictability isn't clever anymore. It's either painfully obvious or just straight up nonsense. Scenes get recycled, logic collapses, and characters are sacrificed to push a romance that actively makes everything worse. And this moment is both the result of that love affair and the reason it ruins everything. If this relationship never existed, we would have watched a very different series. Would it still have been butchered eventually without book material? Probably. But this just sped up the execution and made it embarrassing. Tyrion's trial. I'm just gonna give you a second to actually look at the people sitting in judgment here. We won't even mention the ones I genuinely have no idea who they are, but let's go through the highlights. We've got someone who was breastfed until he was 6, someone who spent the entire show in Older Face's basement, the newly freed Tiara who disappeared for 2 seasons, the Lady of Winterfell herself, the mystical Cripple, Jeff Hardy, and a guy whose greatest achievement is running away really fast. I like Brienne and Davos, nothing bad about them, but everyone here is completely free. Meanwhile, Jon Snow, the guy who saved the realm about 15 times, is rotting in a cage. Yeah, totally serious trial. Absolute cinema. Next. Tyrion visits Jon in jail. Am I tripping or didn't we just do this scene a few minutes ago? Oh right, my bad. Last time it was Jon visiting Tyrion in a cell. Same conversation, same moral debate, just with Jon on the inside this time, quietly absorbing the final stages of his character assassination. Jon says goodbye to the Starks. Honestly, if I were in Jon's shoes, after everything that happened, I wouldn't even want to see these three, but of course we get the goodbye scene. Jon meets them, exchanges a few emotional glances, says his farewells, and heads off to Castle Black, banished for saving the realm. As one does, leaving Ed and Eddie behind to rule, explore, and vibe. Short, quiet, and whole, which is kind of perfect actually, because that's exactly how Jon's entire ending feels. Brienne finishing Jaime's war in the Kingsguard book. This could have been a good plot point, Jaime wanting to atone for his sins, to grow as a person, to become better. That journey was genuinely nice, the whole Oathkeeper thing was nice, him leaving Cersei to fight for the living was nice, but the ending completely ruins it. Jaime returns to square one, so Brienne finishing his Kingsguard entry like this feels wrong. It's not the ending he deserved, because he didn't finish his journey. It's like quitting in the middle of a marathon and still getting the medal for completing it. He made his choice, he chose to go back, and because of that he shouldn't be rewarded as if he completed the arc and became the man he was trying to be. The new small council. I want you to really look at this group of people and ask yourself one simple question. Does this feel like the best Westeros can do? There's nothing wrong with a lighthearted ending scene, but this is supposed to be the governing body of the realm after the most destructive war in its history. And instead of feeling earned or deliberate, it feels random, like positions were filled based on availability rather than competence. What makes it worse is that the show already had a far more coherent setup right there, if the season had gone differently. Let me paint you a picture of what the small council could have been like if the story actually respected its own characters. Queen Daenerys. If the season committed to her instead of rushing her downfall, this is where everything logically leads. Hand of the Queen, Tyrion. Fault, yes, but still one of the few people with real administrative experience and political instinct. Master of Ships, Yara. An obvious choice, naval power, leadership, experience, and a vested interest in stabilizing the seas. Master of Coin, Davos. This might sound surprising, but it actually makes sense. Davos understands trade, scarcity, and logistics better than most nobles. He has dealt directly with the Iron Bank of Bravos, and most importantly, isn't corrupt. That alone puts him ahead of half the realm. Master of Whisperers, Bran. If the show was absolutely set on placing Bran in King's Landing, this is the only position that actually makes sense for him. His ability to see into the past and potentially the future turns him into an all-seeing intelligence network without spies, bribes, or manipulation. That said, this role already had a perfect owner, Varys. He didn't just gather information, he understood how and when to use it, and more importantly, why. Varys served the realm, not a ruler, and killing him off removed the one character whose entire existence justified this position. Master of Walls, Jon Snow. Jon is the natural choice here. Across the entire series, he consistently puts duty above self-interest, enforces justice even if it costs him personally, and understands both mercy and consequence. He's respected by commoners and nobles alike, and his authority comes from actions, not titles. Realistically, this role could have also suited Jorah Mormont, a man shaped by exile, dishonor, and eventual redemption, with a deep understanding of woe, punishment, and loyalty, but as with Varys, it would be cheating to pick him. Master of War, Grey Worm. A proven commander with no interest in politics, exactly what you want in that role. Grandmaster Sam. This one actually works. Sam has the knowledge and the willingness to learn, which already puts him ahead of most maesters we've seen. The frustrating part isn't that the show chose different people, it's that it chose people without clearly justifying why they belong there. If Bran had to be in King's Landing, he should have been Master of Whisperers. If Varys had to die, it shouldn't have been in a way that erased the purpose of his character. Instead, we get a council that feels less like the future of Westeros and more like the leftovers after a rushed ending. Yeah, it just season 8, whatever. King Bran. I'm at the point where this is so ridiculous that I can't even get mad anymore. He can't walk. He speaks in riddles like he's some kind of a sphinx. He did nothing, and I mean nothing, for the entire story except revealing Jon's heritage, which ended up not mattering at all. And if this guy is such a genius, transcendent being, how did he not foresee the burning of King's Landing? You'd think the three-eyed raven, the all-seeing mastermind, might notice a city about to get nuked. Now look, if Bran was secretly orchestrating the entire Game of Thrones from the shadows, fine. Make him the final villain or the ultimate puppet master. That would at least be interesting, but as things stand, he was completely useless. Jon had more impact on the fight against the Night King than Bran did, and that fight was literally Bran's entire purpose. Oh, and he wouldn't have even made it to the Three-Eyed Raven if it wasn't for the people who died protecting him. People he immediately disregarded the moment they were no longer useful. Didn't acknowledge their sacrifices, didn't honor them, just sat there, staring into the void like a proper king would. And no, I don't care that he gave Arya the dagger. Arya shouldn't have killed the Night King in the first place. The only thing Bran successfully prevented in the entire series was his own death. Even with all his knowledge knowledge, he didn't prevent anyone else's. Take Theon for example. His death was completely preventable. If Bran knew Arya was going to kill the Night King anyway, telling Theon to stay back and guard him would have done wonders. And don't tell me Theon staying wouldn't have created the opening. Arya's jump wasn't created by an opening, it just happened. Prime Jeff Hardy came flying with a swanton bomb. Even Arya, a borderline assassin by the end, saved more lives than Bran ever did, and she doesn't even see the future. But sure, oh hell the new king. If the season ended with Bran smiling or something like that, I might have accepted the idea that he was the evil mastermind pulling the strings, or the three-eyed raven finally infiltrating humanity to destroy it from within. But as it stands, there are no clear signs that this was ever thought out that way. Sansa being the only Stark in Winterfell. How is this even fitting for her? She was the Stark who wanted to leave Winterfell the most in season 1, dreaming about South, marrying Joffrey, burying his children, and becoming a queen. That was her entire goal. And now suddenly, in the later seasons, she's all about the North, about tradition, about staying in Winterfell and ruling for the people. That shift is insane. And before anyone brings up the whole Snow Winterfell castle thing in the Eyrie, I don't really buy it. It was convenient nostalgia. There is nothing wrong with wanting to return home, but don't act like this was always the life she wanted, because it clearly wasn't. I wouldn't even have a problem with Sansa being one of the Starks in Winterfell. That would make sense. But her being the only figure of authority there after everything that happened just doesn't feel right. The only Stark who was truly about the North from start to finish was Jon. And yeah, we all know how that turned out. Jon returning to the Night's Watch. Honestly, you could pick almost any negative moment in this episode as the worst one, but somehow this still takes the cake. Oh, now I get it. I finally cracked Game of Thrones. So Jon starts as a bastard, goes to the Night's Watch in season 1, grows as a character, fights countless life-threatening battles, literally saves humanity multiple times, and once his entire journey is complete, he ends up right back at the Night's Watch. But now he's a Targaryen, with none of his friends, with no real threat beyond the wall, with his heritage not mattering at all, and as a Queenslayer. That's it. That's the story. Bring the curtains. The character who arguably deserved the most, and let's be honest, is probably the fan favorite, got absolutely wronged in every possible way. Brilliant. Truly brilliant. Short opinion of episode 6. I genuinely don't think there was a worse possible way for the show to end than this. The two main protagonists we've been following for the entire series get done dirty in the worst ways imaginable. Even Gendry, who was basically non-existent for most of the show, somehow ends up with a better ending than both Jon and Daenerys combined. Was Bran's suffering in any way greater than Jon's or Daenerys's? Was his path more difficult? Was his sense of justice more absolute? Is he genuinely better suited to rule? And this is the foreshadowing I was highlighting. Jon not killing the Night King feels less like a bold narrative choice and more like setup for him not ending up as King of Westeros. It subtly undermines his character so that, by the end, he doesn't get rewarded. Game of Thrones tends to use this kind of predispositions, where characters almost dies or goes through a devastating situation before their actual end. The purpose is to subconsciously prepare the viewer, to soften the emotional impact, and honestly that's terrible writing. First, it takes away from the moment itself. An emotion felt, whether sorrow or joy, is still an emotion, and dulling it weakens the story. Second, it makes the outcome obvious. You know the character is going to get done dirty. Daenerys is the perfect example. After the whole dragon incident in the battle against the Night King, I was certain she was going to die. I didn't know how, I didn't know when, I just knew. And I was genuinely surprised when she didn't die before Jon took care of her. Overall, a disappointing final, fitting for a disappointing season. Food for thought. For some reason, the writers decided to humanize the villains and villainize the heroes. We followed the story for 8 seasons, and we saw just how disgusting and disturbing Cersei was, doing horrible things without hesitation, without remorse, without even a hint of regret. And now in season 8, we are suddenly meant to experience her pain, like she's some tragic main character we are supposed to feel sorry for. She dies in Jaime's arms, framed as this emotional, heartbreaking moment, and I just don't get it. What's the point of a villain if you're going to humanize them right at the very end? Imagine if Ramsay suddenly started crying while Jon was walking towards him, talking about how hard his life was, listing all the bad things that happened to him, apologizing in the process. That would have completely ruined the scene, right? Now you might say that Baelish begging for his life during his trial is a good example of how this can be done correctly, and that Cersei's case isn't that different, but Baelish was always portrayed as a snake, slimy, cowardly, and willing to do anything to survive. Him breaking down and begging actually fits his character. Cersei, on the other hand, was portrayed for most of the show as ruthless, deranged, and completely devoid of redeeming qualities. For her, the only fitting end was to die as who she truly was, not humanized, not softened, but exposed for what she really was, a mad woman capable of anything. And another thing, did trial by combat just got lost in transition or what? Jon could have easily demanded a trial by combat against Grey Worm, and probably beaten him without much trouble. I really don't think a jury made of his friends and family would have had an issue with that. You could argue that Grey Worm and the Unsullied aren't from Westeros, so they might not respect the tradition, fair enough, but Jon could have at least tried. And about Daenerys, I have a little poem I wrote. I am not a writer, so please don't be too harsh on me. It goes: freeing the slaves and burning the free, reviving the Dothraki, hoping no one will see. The only thing worse than her burning the people is the king being Bran the Cripple. Thank you. Can we get a round of applause? Thank you. First of all, I want to thank you guys for watching the videos I made for each season. Game of Thrones is in a league of its own as a series. I loved almost every second and every episode of it. And I genuinely tried to turn that love into the best videos I could make. I really hope that came true. Second, I won't rate this season, it just doesn't fit with the rest of the show. It feels like a completely different series. Character development we followed for seasons goes straight down the drain. Most characters act completely out of line compared to what we've seen from them so far. And the story itself feels rushed. Because of that, I don't think it's fair to rate the final season as part of Game of Thrones as a whole. Thank you guys, love you, and I'll see you in the next one.